Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How to Leverage Database as a Service on Your Terms. This event is presented in partnership with our friends at Nutanix. Thank you so much for joining us on the webinar today. We've got a great event lined up for you. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know. First off, I should mention my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. We're all former IT professionals ourselves here at Actual Tech Media, and we want these events to be educational. We want to help you to solve your technology challenges. So as you have a question during the event, we encourage you to use the questions box there in your audience console. And we will be doing a Q&A session at the end of the event. We even have our best question prize to help encourage questions, and I'll be talking about that here in just a moment. But first, I want to call your attention there to the Handouts tab. It's there that you'll find 4 different resources that you need to check out. The first one is the IDC info brief on IT practitioners' views on the challenges of hybrid cloud. Make sure you check that one out. Also, the solution brief on Nutanix Era, simplified database operations for any cloud. There's the RBL Bank case study, how they drive their digital journey with Nutanix. And finally, perhaps the most important one is the link there to take a test drive of Nutanix Era. We'll be talking about that here later in the event. But those resources are available there for you throughout the event, and I encourage you to check them out. At the end of the webinar today, I'll be announcing the winner of our Visa $300 gift card door prize. If you're watching this on demand, of course, that drawing has already occurred. The prize terms can be found there in the Handouts tab. And then we also have our best question prize, as I mentioned, for a $50 Visa gift card selected based on those who ask questions. So you have to ask a question to be entered into that prize drawing. And then, of course, meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions as well. All right. So with that housekeeping information out of the way, I'm excited now to introduce you to our expert presenter. Welcome, Maggie Smith, Senior Solutions Marketing Manager at Nutanix. Hi, Maggie. Thanks for being on.
Hi, David. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're excited to learn about Nutanix, a database as a service. So take it away, Maggie.
All right, great. And it's a very interesting title because this is a concept that we spend a lot of time talking to customers about, is how to take their database and making it more meaningful, make it more available to a wide spectrum of people within the organizations, all the way from stakeholders in the financial community who want to run reports to, most important, the developer community who are embedding these databases into new applications hosted on cloud. So let me get started. I'm going to skip a couple slides here because I want to go right to some of the problems that our customers face. And this is at a very high level, kind of that 50,000 foot view that I wanted to kind of organize thoughts and so forth around the problems that challenge the organization, specifically around databases. The first one is about risk. And what I've talked to customers about a lot of times is looking at what we call the database estate or fleet. Both are used simultaneously to describe how many databases occur in a company. And the info brief that David mentioned, I'm going to cite some of the surveys questions that we came back with from IDC as they surveyed their customers, but one of which, over the 800 customers who were surveyed, that represents the info brief findings, each of these customers had on average 13 databases copies of a specific database that they were managing. So if you think about all the databases that are organized and present in an organization, supporting HR, supporting finance, supporting ERP, and you replicate that, each time that replication occurs, that's a database that must stay compliant to company policy as well as stay up to date on database versions. And so if you don't, this is where risk steps up, is that cyber criminals, as we know where those holes are in certain database engine versions and will worm themselves in through a vulnerable copy of a database. So in order to stay on top of that risk aversion, you really need to think about keeping that database current and ready. They're costly. And it's not just the license estate of managing all of the database that you're supporting and all of the users who want to get access to it, but the underlying infrastructure as well can be costly, especially if you don't have one that scales easily and efficiently. And so all a result of that, it adds a lot of complexity to the organization. And the bottom line, it reduces agility. Agility in getting to market faster with new applications, agility in managing the access to that database, and agility in terms of how quickly it responds to your stakeholder needs. So again, these are just common concerns and things grouped into 4 categories that I hear from customers all the time about the challenges they face. So this is kind of a deeper dive into it. So if you look at just the commercial engine, so to speak, of databases today that are deployed using Oracle database or using the Microsoft SQL Server, the constant provisioning, patching, and updates that are needed, as I mentioned earlier, are the ones that you need to stay on top of to reduce that risk. And oftentimes you need some specialized IT resources to make sure that database architecture is tuned well. And so this goes back to our title of leveraging database as a service and how you can implement such practice of such as delivering database as a service to your practitioners to help with that and reduce the specialized services that are needed. And then vendors often come out with some really good best practices. I know Microsoft SQL Server has them in terms of fine tuning the performance, as well as Oracle, of course. But oftentimes you have to manually add those things into your database process. And so how do you really stay on top of that in order to not only reduce risk, but reduce cost? Now, I mentioned of the customers that we surveyed, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the survey next, in conjunction with IDC last fall. What we found is there's a lot of database copies out there. And so this is where I often call it the long tail of databases. You might have heard that term applied to folks like Amazon's marketplace, where you can find anything. Well, think about every time a database is cloned or copied, as I mentioned earlier, that becomes something that has to be managed. And we've overwhelmed our database administration team because they really need to spend most of their time on what we call the tier 1 databases, the one that run the business. So if they're spending all their time preventing outage, making sure that it's running wonderfully and can respond to stakeholder needs, what do you do with the tier X databases, the ones in the long tail? And so this leads to a really big storage dilemma as well. And how do I scale my infrastructure in order to manage all of those copies that I'm making within my database estate? So all of this, as I've mentioned, just slows things down in an organization. If the database isn't up and running when at 3 o'clock in the morning and a big order is trying to get placed, that's a problem. And so you want to have the capabilities built into your database machine, for lack of a better term, that can manage this complex lifecycle situation with these databases. So I'm going to give you a couple of hints, and this is why you want to download this info brief, because this is just a couple of slides that I pulled from this study. Let me give you a little background on this. We approached IDC along with Intel to help us go out and survey customers and to find out what are some of the very significant issues that they're managing with respect to their database estate and database fleet. And so one of the things, as you see here, one question was organizations aren't planning properly when they're moving workloads and specifically database workloads in the cloud. And what happens is they're experiencing not the positive results that they expected with cost reduction and scale and efficiency, but more negative. And at 37%, which is a significant number, responded that budget and cost was a surprise from when you're placing workloads into the cloud. And it really just thinking about, is cloud the right place? Is a public cloud the right place for your databases? And this is what the questions and what we found out from these challenges that customers are facing from this survey, what they are facing as they put these new workloads into the cloud. Of course, migration of legacy systems to the clouds, there's a lot of work that goes on in terms of making sure the database workloads that are placed in the cloud comply to organizational policy in terms of security, in terms of access. And so these are kinds of things that our customers are concerned about. So once they've gotten into the cloud, what are some of the challenges that they face when they're running these database workloads in the cloud? Well, one, of course, is data production. Can I get access to this when I need it? Is it responsive? Are the workloads the right workloads? Do I have data in that cloud that shouldn't be there? that may not meet state and legal issues and compliance issues regarding placement of data in the cloud, that whole data locality, so to speak. So these are some of the things that came out of this survey. I want to show you one more slide from it because I'm really going to hope that you will have an opportunity to download this. So what we learned from this survey is all of these management challenges, regardless of where the workload is, whether it's on-prem behind the firewall and running in a virtualized environment, whether it's up in a public cloud, or both. And I found a lot of customers are running both, of course. We call that a hybrid cloud. Is that the challenges that they were facing the past month was things around data duplication, again, the cloning of the database in order to move them back and forth to the cloud for data protection purposes, as well as accessibility. And so what they also found that data was becoming lost oftentimes after they've moved into the cloud where they couldn't locate it. So the whole data locality issue was hurting them. And what they were coming back to say is, I could really use a common management platform between what I'm putting in the cloud versus what I'm leaving on premise. And that's what we call database as a service. Having the ability to set your database up so your practitioners, your stakeholders, your developers can easily access it for the needs that they have in terms of what they are delivering to the organization. So I'd encourage you to download that piece. It's a really good piece, and it was very insightful in terms of some of the issues our customers face, not only Nutanix customers, because these were not just Nutanix customers. There are about 800 people we interviewed, represented globally from all different industries. And so, again, it was a very common concern and a common issue that was expressed through this survey. So let's take a minute that we've talked about some of the challenges faced on a global perspective. Let's think about your biggest database management challenges. And here's a poll. You've got 4 choices that you can collect, and just go ahead and start telling us, what are your biggest database management challenges? David,
Absolutely.
I
Yeah,
think
I'm
you wanted
curious.
to talk about some of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to find out the results of this poll here. The question on the screen for everyone out there, if you haven't answered one of these polls before, you just do it in the slides window. The question is, what are your biggest database management challenges? And this is a single multi-select question, I'm sorry. So you might have more than one challenge there. So, feel free to select more than one if you're experiencing more than one challenge. Could be around data duplication and capacity, could be challenges related to your inability to easily provision new databases, perhaps it's database protection, and or it could be data stored in suboptimal places. So we've got
That's an
lots of.
interesting term. That's a very interesting term.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
All right. Lots of good responses coming in. We appreciate your feedback on this. So let me go ahead
Good.
now and just share the results. And it looks like the suboptimal places, data being stored somewhere that you don't really want it to be, or would prefer to have it in a maybe higher performance, more highly available, more scalable location. And that's the number one challenge that folks are facing. But it's almost evenly tied with data that's not properly protected in some way. Maggie, what do you think about the results?
I think that's very quite consistent to what I hear from our customers. And some of the suboptimal places I wanted to address that first is, and I talked a little bit about this, as we migrate workloads into a public cloud setting, is that the right place that we need and place that, especially from a data locality perspective? And how responsive is that workload to my shareholders' needs and my stakeholders' needs? So that's a very interesting point. And also, as I mentioned back earlier, there's compliance issues that need to be considered. Certainly in the healthcare market, for instance, can't put patient data into a public cloud without it completely protected. And so that's something to think about as that suboptimal place of storing this database. And I also like the notion about, I call it data protection and disaster recovery, because if you go to a situation where you have to recover a database and you don't have the latest version or the last data backup that you needed in order to build a recovery point, that's a concern, and I can see why that's 96%. We would say, well, I think we had a couple duplicate answers, but that's okay. There's a lot of things to think about. So that's very consistent with what we're hearing from our customers, and quite consistent that the IDC survey revealed when they went out and talked to a lot of different folks about database management challenges. So I'm going to move ahead and talk about some solutions to how to address that. And first, I wanted to introduce you to Nutanix solution for databases. It's a complete solution that we look at from a kind of two perspectives. Number one is the infrastructure. What kind of infrastructure do you have in place that can be simple to install, simple to use, constantly available, easily extendable, and scales with efficiency, and of course is fast. And I'm going to show you some of the data we have to prove the fact that the performance does matter, especially when you load up more transactional databases onto your infrastructure. Now with that, we have a product called Nutanix Era. And these are four things that Nutanix Era does very, very well. Let me start from the bottom of database protection, because that was one of the big concerns referenced from the poll, is that we have a solution that through a time machine process can go back and capture previous versions of the database clone. So in the event you need to recover, you can do that quickly and easily. Provisioning is another capability that we provide through Nutanix Era. And I'll give you an example. When I talk to a lot of customers, especially developers, and they're building out a new application and they need a database to test it out. So they knock on the DBA's door and they say, Ms. DBA, I need a database. And she said, well, give me your specs, and then give you your specs, and they outline what they need. And she said, okay, 3 weeks. That's when I'm going to get it back to you. That's totally unacceptable if you want to deliver an application quickly and easily. And I can tell you a lot about some of our customers that face that long provisioning time that we were able to reduce oftentimes from weeks to minutes and be able to get that database into the hands of that stakeholder faster. So these are the four things that Era does very well. I should mention patching, especially when you've got that long tail of database copies out there that need to be patched simultaneously. And we've reduced patching time significantly for a lot of our customers. That includes, I'm going to talk a little bit about JetBlue and some of their use with Nutanix solutions for database, as well as some of the other customers that we have that reduce those cycles, reduce the patching time, reduce the provisioning time, and have a much more clear and expedient process for protecting that database. And regardless, I should say, regardless of whether it's sitting on an Amazon or an Azure cloud or sitting on-prem, Nutanix Era can solve both of those situations. We have a common data management plane between what you have on-premise with Nutanix Era and what you decide to put in the Nutanix cloud using the Nutanix solution. So let's go on. I want to show you a couple things more about Era. First, let me talk about, let me build that out for you. It's got about 6 builds I'm going to do here. There we are. Should have taken them out before. So this is kind of a stack level view of how we supply a database as a service. In this case, it's database as a service through Nutanix Era. So let's go back to my previous example of provisioning for the developer community. And instead of knocking on the DBA's door and asking her for a database, and she says, sorry, I'm too busy, I just can't get it to you quickly enough, or on your timeline and on your time schedule, on your terms, so to speak, I'm going to set this up through Era so you have the ability, and it's a role-based system, she's got to give that permission, to go and make your own database and create your own database. So instead of that Nutanix the DBA responding to that need, she's going to let the developer go ahead and do that. And just think of the time to market that you can reduce in getting that application out. So that's just one example of how database as a service works for customers. Patching, I said, is another way to manage that long tail of databases where you've got all your databases registered through the Nutanix platform, you press a button and the patch goes through and finds all of those SQL versions that need to be updated or all those Oracle versions that need to be updated. Now we do support a number of different database engines through either a command line interface, through an API, which is great for the developers, and of course a console, which is good for the DBAs. And as you see, from one console, you can support multiple database engines. So you may have Oracle running your business, you may have SQL Server running engineering or supporting the engineering work, or perhaps supporting some marketing operations. And you may also, as a number of our customers are starting to do, exploring the world of the open source community, represented by MySQL and PostgreSQL. And so a number of different customers are starting to look at the open source community because of its wide range of libraries and really building out the database on their terms as something that they can start to deploy and get to market faster, specifically the applications that they want to introduce to the market. So through a single console, we support all of these databases through the Era console or through the command line interface or through the API. You have that choice. Now there's extended capabilities we provide with the Nutanix platform through our management tool called Prism. And we have a number of solutions within our portfolio that can also help with the application automation. That's called Nutanix Calm. We have data protection capabilities built in. We have self-healing architecture that's built into the environment as well, and complete extensibility that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means in terms of the performance support that you can see from our database. And as you see, we have the common consumption model. So you decide your terms where you want to deploy the database, and through Nutanix Era, we can help you manage that across one common control plane. We call this the Webscale Architecture, and we're kind of familiar with what that means. It's anything like you're using Amazon or AWS, it scales for you as you need it. You just give them the credit card in order to buy what you need. And so that's where hyperconvergence steps in nicely. It's localizing the I/O capabilities so it really fine-tunes the performance. And that's where you really need the performance, is when transactional databases are running on your infrastructure. You want to have the ability to respond not only to the reads, but also the writes that are occurring in a natural database transaction. We've built in software-defined intelligence into Prism as well as into Era that allows you to set up what you need. I mentioned my examples for patching and provisioning, but also through our Prism management tool, we have intelligence built that in that automatically helps you scale your application or scale your environment as the performance and the perhaps storage needs grow. You have the ability to really extend that architecture as you need it very easily. And we distribute workloads to various nodes that across the entire cluster to eliminate those bottlenecks that often occur, especially, let's say, 3 o'clock in the afternoon when order processing is chunking away and you're putting orders through. The system will look at balancing the capabilities of that transaction and that database transaction across the entire cluster. And so it will move that through a common storage fabric that will make sure performance bottlenecks are reduced. So you can start small. That's fairly interesting. And a lot of our customers start with what we call a 4-node or 4-server cluster and then add as they go. Very extensible, very easily to add. And once you need to scale, you simply add the storage, you add the memory, you add the servers you need, and the system will automatically update that and distribute that through its common storage fabric. So this is some of the really good capabilities that we provide, especially for database performance, where it's very critical. So, talking about database performance, we worked with an industry analyst by the name of ESG, Enterprise Strategy Group, and we asked them, okay, look, this is what we did in our labs. We wanted to test both SQL Server performance and specifically transactional performance on our clusters. And we did this as well with Oracle. I'm going to show you the next graph to show you what that performance looked like. Can you validate that for us? And I think the handout, we did give you the ESG report, but easily, if you'd like to see some of the details behind this and what we did with the ESG, simply go to Nutanix.com and type in ESG in the search bar, and you'll see this report come back, which is called, I think, multi-workload performance analysis from ESG. We updated this back in October, so it's got some new information in terms of not only running databases, but perhaps running VDI on Nutanix platforms, and you can see the performance of bursting desktops immediately from that workstation. But I digress. So as you see, we start off with a single node, and we've got a number of transactions occurring. So then what's going to happen is we're going to continue to load this up, more transactions. Again, this is a SQL Server environment, which is a really big OLTP environment. They do a lot of test marks, benchmarks, the TPCH benchmark, and so forth, which is a critical one that really supports the transactional capabilities of SQL Server. And you notice the consistency we're getting. Each time we add more database instances and more database read writes, we're getting a very consistent performance. And this is where the Webscale architecture helps you. It delivers balance, it delivers performance as you need it, and distributes that performance and distributes those transaction workloads appropriately within the cluster so those bottlenecks don't occur. And I promised you the similar thing on Oracle. Almost a 53% improvement with near scalability for both read and writes. As we know, Oracle's a very read and write heavily transactionally focused database. And so that's what we asked them to validate, which they did. And what we saw is a very consistent performance. In this case, as I mentioned, read and write, very consistent performance with the cluster that we provided them. So the devils are in the details, and I'd encourage you to go to Nutanix.com and take a look at that report. So let's go back to Era. And as I mentioned, it's really big job. And where we're finding more and more customers that are getting so much more value out of using this is setting up what we're calling the database as your service. And a service that you're providing your stakeholders, your developers, your constituents within your organization, the ability to do and access the database on their terms. Now, again, it's role-based. Not everybody can get to every database they want. That's decisions, compliance decisions that management makes, but it does ease that pain of provisioning. It eases that pain of lifecycle management. And more specifically, as what we saw from the poll, it really helps with the database protection through the capabilities we provide of copy data management, time machine collection, and having that ability to easily recover a database as needed. And I said one console, one CLI, one API for across multiple engines. And we have a lot of our customers that are doing that. They may not be just a SQL shop. They may not be just an Oracle shop. They may be using both. And they're using Nutanix Era to help manage that database lifecycle much more efficiently and with a lot more agility. So let's go back and take a look at some use cases. And I mentioned the one-click provisioning. I think I've gone over and over on that, so I won't over-rotate on that. And I said these are the things that we do very well. And the copy data management is the database snapshotting capability that we provide. It optimates it for cloning, and more specifically, it optimizes the cloning for storage. We have a number of customers that have come back and said, I've been able to reduce my storage budget by 20 to 30%. One customer told me $37,000 in 1 year. He reduced his entire storage spend because of Era and the copy data management capability. And the cloning is so efficient that we can help them save a lot of money in their storage deployments. So that's a real, well, you can take that to the bank. That's a very quantifiable perspective of how customers are saving money. We've talked about patching and the risk that out-of-band patching presents to an organization if they don't stay on top of it, especially for cyber concerns and opening up potential cyber risks within their database infrastructure. You can also test new database updates and patches through this patching process, this one-click patching process that will help you find things that aren't working. Perhaps there's something in the new version that's not helping with compliance purposes and doesn't meet some of the policies you have. So you can test drive that out and make some decisions of which databases should be patched immediately and ones that should be patched perhaps at another time. And then this is really an interesting where a lot of customers are using us. So they want to update their aging infrastructure, perhaps on their old risk architectures for something they purchased from Hewlett Packard or IBM. Perhaps they're on a three-tier system that is just expensive to manage and expensive to use and expensive to scale. And so this is where the capabilities we provide with Nutanix Cloud Infrastructure and with Nutanix Era is help that manage that data migration. So you're moving off an older legacy system and moving perhaps, of course, into Nutanix's architecture. You can use Era to assist with that capability. I should mention, too, that we have a number of services that can help with that migration policy. Our Nutanix Service Organization has a number of different tiered packages that you can use for not only just getting set up on Nutanix and getting Era installed and getting it running, but also use them as a migration source that can help you do some pre-planning, some pre-architecture, and workshop planning around how quickly that migration will occur. So just putting a plug in for our Nutanix Services Organization, but these are really the 4 use cases I've mentioned for Nutanix Era that our customers continue to love. And I call them love letters from customers of how happy they are with Nutanix Era and how it's helped with the economics within their organization, saving money, reducing cost, risk, and reducing time to get things done. I'm going to skip this because I think I've probably gone through this quite a bit, but I'll let this build out. And this is actually a whiteboard that came to me from a customer. He said, this is what you've solved for me. Well, let me spend for a few minutes on it. This is what you've solved for me. Look at all the specific steps that I have to do just to do a provision. So you can understand when the developer knocks on the DBA's door and says, it's going to take me 3 weeks to get this to you, all of the different steps, in this case, this customer had to do in terms of mounting databases on a specific server, making sure the specs were met, creating a cluster for them, setting up and allocating storage, And at the bottom, what they told me, and I'm going to give an example shortly with one of our customers, it was just reducing their time to market. They had customers asking for new applications, and this was a specific bank, RBL Bank, which you have in your handouts. They had customers asking for new applications that they couldn't deliver fast enough, simply because the provisioning process to get databases to the developer was slowing things down. So what we've done with Era, as you see here, let me go back. Sorry about that. Thought that had a build. It really speeds up the process. And so this is just the case if you just have the DBA provisioning and you haven't set up a database as service for your constituencies. The request comes in, the database consumer, she asks for the request, she goes to the DBA clicks some buttons, boom, there's your database. We've reduced it down to less than 5 minutes in some instances. And you can imagine the organizational processes that this fixes. I've got something here called eliminates friction, because there's oftentimes the developers are mad at the DBAs because they can't get things done fast enough, and they're sitting there waiting for the database so they can test their new application. So the bottom line is not only do we add value in terms of reducing time and reducing cost, but we add value in terms of time to market and delivering new applications to the organization. So new customers can be gained, new services can be sold. And again, I'm going to show you a couple instances from our customers of how they benefit from that capability. I think this is in your handouts, but if it's not, this is another study that we did. It's about a year old now, where we went out and talked to Era customers globally. And we said really what we wanted to focus in on was what are the values that you're seeing? What's the value that Era has provided your organization? And there's some great numbers in here, and how it pays itself back in 6 months. It has a ROI of 291%. But there's some very specific cases that you'll see, and I mentioned about the storage consumption going down, the delivery of applications faster because databases are provisioned faster for the developers. Really good report. If we don't have it in your handout, I'm going to send you back to Nutanix.com and just search on Forrester Research TCO Study Era. Pretty simple. And that will come up to you there. But it's a really good document that talks about some very specific ways that we've added a lot of value to our organizations simply by having them set up a database as service through Era on their terms. All right, my favorite customer. RBL Bank is the largest bank in India. And they came to us with a specific problem. Their call center volume was out of control, where customers that were having a banking issue, maybe they had a question, they wanted a new service, they had an issue with an account, and it was just the customer service was suffering. The call center couldn't respond fast enough because they didn't have applications that the customer, specifically the call center, could use and send the customer to resolve their problem. And so through use of Nutanix Era and bringing on their core banking application, in this case customer service, and their call center onto the Nutanix hyperconvergent platform, they were able to save up to $250,000 in call center hours alone in staffing the call center. So the call center people can now do some things that we would rather call center people do, like sell new services to their banking community versus addressing problems that their customers are facing. Now we're continuing with RBL Bank. They were so impressed with what we could do for their call center application that they're now extending this across the entire bank operation and using Nutanix's database as a service capability through Era in order to provision their developers so they can get those new applications out. Banking has become a very competitive process, and we have a lot of choices as consumers of who we want to bank with, and one of the choices I always make is what can I do online so I don't have to go to the branch. And so this is an example of how banks are starting to deploy databases quickly and easily into the application so they can give their banking community new applications and stay competitive in the market. So you do have the RBL Bank case study as one of your handouts. Now, this is another example of a retailer who had cost concerns, and they wanted to, I can't name them because they've asked to remain anonymous, but they're a global retailer, and they wanted to set up better and faster self-service capabilities for their developers so they could extend their online retail applications and so forth, their retail online presence to be more efficient for their consumers. So with new Nutanix Era and new Nutanix Cloud Platform, again, that self-provisioning process with Nutanix Era's database as a service capabilities allowed them to get to the developers faster so they could build out these applications. And the fact that they were able to reduce, again, the storage needed in order to support all of the database cloning and data protection that's needed in the database environment. They saved a lot of money with the infrastructure that was supporting their fleet of databases, those long tail of database copies. So this was another example of some good work that we've done with one of our customers. We're doing more work with JetBlue. In fact, I do want to put a little bit of a pitch. We have a database event coming up that's going to be hosted by Nutanix. I'm hoping to have JetBlue. We're talking to them now about coming to talk to us about their continued use of Nutanix as their preferred database infrastructure supplier with Era. So stay tuned for that. But it's going to be a good event, and just come to the Nutanix website to register. We should have the registration page up probably by mid-February. But anyway, again, their biggest concern that they originally approached us on was patching. I think I mentioned that earlier, is that through their big fleet and their database estate, they had so many copies of the database, it was taking too long to keep everything patched well. And so what they realized is updates and upgrades to new database versions happened in hours instead of days. And so they were very grateful about what they could do from the capabilities we provide them to make them more efficient with their database operation and their lifecycle management. So as I said, I'm going to put a plug in. I'm hoping to have JetBlue. They're going to be talking to us about how they're continuing the expansion of Nutanix within their environment. They use us for a lot of different use cases, not only for their database operations, but they're also using this for their VDI deployments. So they're a very happy customer for Nutanix. And this was the healthcare provider I talked about. Just want to give you a little details about that. They were trying to build out a new reporting server and get their development data lab up to speed pretty quickly. So the provisioning process that I described and have been describing really helped them through by deploying Era. But a lot of what they saw is they were reducing a lot of the performance burden they were seeing from their production databases simply by the allowing that Webscale architecture to take over and help them reduce the bottlenecks. And this was their big claim, is the fact that they found that the claims data loads to their organization, the healthcare claims that were coming in, were taking much faster time to load so they can be processed by the clinician that was managing the claim. But more importantly, they saved a lot of money on their storage infrastructure by the efficiencies we provide in the cloning and data protection process. Fortunately, they have asked not to be named, but they've given us some nice quotes to talk about how they've used the department, our Era, along with the database infrastructure we've provided, and can remain a very happy customer and continue to expand their environment with Nutanix Cloud Platform. Now, this is another one company that we've worked with. They just started to use Era and deployed, I think it was starting last quarter, well, beg your pardon, in spring time frame, I shouldn't say quarter. SB Technology, they are the technology arm of Softbank, which is a huge online vendor. They do a lot of funding out of Japan for startups and so forth. And they really just had a basic need. They were finding that, again, the provisioning and data protection process was taking too long, but they also needed to update their platform in something that was more modern, that could be responsive to scale, it was responsive to cost reduction, and of course, time and risk reduction. So their modernization process just took 2 months through the database deployment capabilities we provide through ERIC, and they also took advantage of some of the services we provide to help them do that pre-planning to make sure that the migration would go smoothly. So this has been a new customer of ours. We're very happy to have them, and they continue to expand their use of Nutanix within their company. So a couple things, just wanted to wrap up before we start to take some questions. This is what our customers tell us. Why do I want to deploy on Nutanix for databases? Because we deliver those outcomes that you can take to the bank. You can see some of these numbers that we've gotten. Some of them are anecdotal, that come from our customers. Some of them are represented in the TCO study that I mentioned from Forrester. And some of them are also represented in some IDC studies that we've done around the Nutanix platform, which we're updating now. So we'll have some newer numbers coming out probably by the spring. And you should see it's just keeping the business running, simplifying the database management lifecycle, satisfying, and this is really important, constituents' needs and stakeholder needs, especially the developer community, who can get those applications faster. And at the bottom line is it just saves a lot of money by deploying Era with the Nutanix cloud infrastructure to run your databases and really has been a very effective deployment process for our customers. So I don't, I could go on and on and on and tell you more about this, but what I would encourage you to do is visit our test drive. This is a place where you can go and actually take a test drive of Era. We'll give you a couple instances of provisioning a database. We'll show you how easy it is to patch all through. And we show you the single console in this case. So I would encourage you to drop into test drive, take a drive, and then encourage you also to give us a call. We'd love to talk to you about your database deployments and see how we can help and see how we can bring the same benefits that we brought to our customers into your organization. So I thank you for your time today. I think we've got one more poll, right, David?
That's right. Yeah, great presentation, Maggie. I love
Thank you.
hearing about all the different customer case studies, stories there, and how they've been helped by the Nutanix database as a service solution. We've just brought up our poll on the screen here, final poll of the event. The question is, what are your biggest challenges in building a hybrid cloud infrastructure that supports your databases? And again, this is a multi-select question, so feel free to select more than one answer on the poll, and we'll leave that up while we kick off our Q&A session here with a first question I see that came in. This one is coming in from Bradford, who wants to know if Nutanix could help with monitoring database sprawl and data gravity and provide trend reporting and maybe suggestions for a database minimization or deduplication.
Yeah, Brad, that's a good question. Very interesting question. And that's kind of a combination to what we provide in our or workplace or our cluster management, Prism and Prism Pro, in terms of the suggestions of how to tune the system. And that's some of the work we're doing with Era. We get a lot of requests for that is, can you build some more intelligence into Era to help the system automate and give me machine-based suggestions of how to tune that up? So that's definitely something we've got in future for Era roadmap, but a lot of that is also done within Prism and Prism Pro, which is the workload application for our clusters.
Excellent. Excellent. And then let's see, another question here from Raul, who wants to know if Nutanix has a solution to help with multi-site replication of databases.
Well, that's Era, actually. And I'll be honest, we're starting. It's a start. We have the capability today to do replication to AWS. And we have that support. When you're running on the Nutanix stack in AWS, you can replicate very easily up to the AWS environment. And that's also through Nutanix clusters, which is the software tool used in order to bridge between private cloud and public cloud. We've announced public support for Azure. It's now in preview mode. So we're hoping to have that ready in a beta and a final release later this year.
Nice. Nice. And then I notice many folks have responded here to the poll. Of course, we appreciate your feedback. Let me go ahead and share the results now. And it looks like 41%, the top response here was to modernize existing applications and databases, followed closely by reducing cost and complexity. What do you think, Maggie?
That's consistent, especially that second one. And that goes back to some of the work we've done with RBL Bank, some of the work we've done with the global retailer who I can't mention. We also have a major financial company that's doing just that. They're doing a lot of work in moving to PostgreSQL because of the extensive capabilities through its open libraries and open source that it provides, and gives you a lot more control over what you can build out within your database, especially as you're embedding those databases within applications and modernizing your applications to be more available to your customers.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you to everyone who responded to the poll. Let me just go back here to this slide where you can actually click on those URLs on the bottom left corner of the slide. If you mouse over that, you can click on nutanix.com/test-era, and that will launch a new web browser tab or window there on your desktop or laptop computer, and you can try out the Nutanix Era solution for yourself. So I'll just leave that up while we continue with some more questions here from the audience. Next question they're asking, can Nutanix protect databases that I don't know about, or even just, hey, any new database that's created, just make sure it has automatic protection. Is that possible with Nutanix?
Well, with Era, your databases need to be registered. It's a virtualized environment, so they do need to be registered to the Nutanix platform. So that's kind of door number one. But it will find these databases once they're registered, and then that's where you can set up the automation we've talked about, from provisioning, from patching, from cloning, and so forth.
Excellent.
This is an interesting one from
Mhm.
Bradford. Do Nutanix databases remain online during update cycles? Yeah, yeah, you don't have to take them offline, and that's one of the advantages. And to the point where it's so fast. If let's say you're patching, it's so fast you don't even know that it is offline. But you still have that ability to set the patch up through an offline or off hours process. So you don't have to, as many of our DBAs have told us, no longer have to come in on nights and weekends when the database doesn't need to be up and running and ready to do transactions.
Yeah, very nice.
Mhm.
I do see here Randy's asking if Nutanix could help support their edge or IoT applications.
Yes, we have a lot of customers that have they've placed clusters where it's needed. So on the edge, we've got some work with some of our third parties that are starting to support IoT and collecting machine data from that. That would be a good question to have a conversation with one of our reps. That's a very interesting use case, and we could definitely have a conversation with you about that. I
Cool.
do like your with a few advantages of the Era of Oracle Enterprise Manager. Not as familiar. I mean, I've got a competitive viewpoint of all the different management tools are out there. One of which I would safely say is the multi-engine support that we support. So, and a lot of our customers are not just Oracle shops; they're using other databases, and so this is something that we can support them with.
Excellent. What about the licensing model for Nutanix Era? How does that work? Gabrielle's asking that.
That's a question for our sales teams. We've got a number of
Okay.
different licenses depending on your application and your needs, and that would be something to sit down with our sales teams and talk about that. And I like Maggie drives a VW, banks with RBC, and travels on JetBlue. I love that. Well, I don't bank with RBC; they're too far away, and I don't drive a Volkswagen, but I have traveled on JetBlue, so I'll answer that properly. I vote that one is the best question, but I'll let you decide, David.
Okay. Okay. Jim is asking, what about database performance recommendations? Can Nutanix help with that kind of sizing?
You know, we do have a number of different architecture papers that will be very helpful. So let's see, I'm trying to think the best way to navigate this. It's actually you register for this portal, and it's within our support portal, and we're putting out more and more what we call validated design papers. How to set up an Oracle environment, how to set up a SQL Server environment, what's the best reference architecture, so to speak, for these. So continue to watch nutanix.com for more. We've got a lot of work underway in our laboratories. We're also, as I said, validating some of that work with third parties. So the ESG paper is certainly one of them. And we do have some validated architecture and reference papers on nutanix.com through the support portal. I think the best way to get them would be nutanix.com/reference architectures, and that should take you right to, and specifically say for databases, and that should take you right to the pertaining page.
Okay. Okay. Very nice. Here's another question. They want to know which database engines are supported by the Nutanix database solution.
Well, let me go back to that quick slide, and you'll see that. Let's see. There we are. That one's the best one. We've started to diminish, I'll be honest, some support for SAP HANA. We're going to continue to support it in the current versions, but as we move forward with new features and functionality, we're not finding as much need for SAP HANA. So that was a business decision that we made. But talk to your set rep if you're currently a Nutanix customer. Talk about your needs, see what we can do for you. But these are the current versions as of Era 2.4 that we do support. Um, last time I checked, I think the market for structural databases is pretty much consumed by Microsoft and Oracle, but Postgres is catching up, which is kind of interesting. It's really catching up, especially because of the flexibility it provides to the developer community.
Excellent. And that's actually a question that just came in from Randy, who wants to
Mhm.
know where and how does Postgres fit into these options. And so it sounds like
Yeah,
that's a go
that's
ahead.
definitely a supported database. And as I've mentioned, we work with a lot of customers that I can't name, unfortunately, who are starting to do that migration. And so great conversation with the Nutanix rep and SE of how we can help you get there.
Okay. Another question, what's the primary database that Nutanix sees clients using? What have you seen?
Interesting. Personally, it's SQL Server. We're seeing a lot of deployment with SQL Server. Then it's followed pretty close by Oracle. And that's with the IDC numbers and the Forrester, Gartner numbers from a market share perspective. They're still the dominant players in the market.
Nice. And then another question here: how are your customers managing database workloads across different clouds?
Well, that's where what we provide them are some tools to help them think about where and what should be placed. And we give them that common data management plane through Nutanix clusters and Era for managing those databases. If I read the question right, that's a really good question for kind of a pre-sales service call to kind of do a workshop and figure out where's the right place to put these workloads. And that's a very common question our customers get, is trying to understand. And I think that earlier the poll question said the suboptimal places that may not work and be the best place to put a database workload. And so that's some of the work we can do from a services perspective, as well as our SC community is pretty smart. And they can help you do some workshops to kind of figure that out and determine that. We run a lot of what we call boot camps. So that's another thing to think about if you see or you're on our mailing list and you see an opportunity to join one of our boot camps. Those are some of the things that are addressed in the technical boot camps that we talk to customers about.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, it looks like we've covered pretty much all the questions that are out there. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts, or like what's the best way to get started with Era?
Well, certainly have a conversation. Definitely do a test drive. And there's your URL, nutanix.com/testera. This guy is right on top. He's not labeled database, but he's our test driver. And he's right on our homepage. So if you click through and just do a couple clicks, you'll get to the Era test drive. And that would be a great way. And then, just send us a note saying, hey, I'd like to talk to one of your reps about some projects that I have. We'd love to have that conversation with you to see how we can help. So that would be your best bet. And do the download the handouts, give you some more insight into what we can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great suggestions. Seeing is believing. I love the idea of the test drive. You can do it right there from your own computer and, just try it out for yourself. So I'm afraid that's all the time we have in today's webinar slot, but it's been a great session here, Maggie. I learned a lot about how Nutanix is helping customers to, be more efficient in their database management, be more agile, be more scalable, and leverage database as a service. So thank you so much for your excellent presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was great to talk to everybody today.
Absolutely. And thank you to Nutanix, of course, for supporting us. Check out the handouts tab there with the additional resources. You can download those PDF resources, click on the link to take a test drive, as well as the IDC info brief report. So make sure you check those out. I will leave up a reminder to try out Nutanix Era there with the hyperlinks on the screen while I announce our Visa $300 gift card winner on today's live event. This is going out to Aaron Littman from New Jersey. Congratulations, Aaron Littman from New Jersey. And we'll reach out to our best question prize winner as well. Thank you to everyone who joined us on the webinar today. I hope you learned a lot and have a great day. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.